I've always been proud of what I've accomplished, though it hasn't always been easy to say that out loud. At 30, I have a solid career, a decent salary, and a growing sense of independence that I worked my whole life to achieve. Growing up, I always knew I was capable of more than what my parents expected of me, but it took years to get to the point where I felt confident enough to actually step away from their shadow. When I was younger, my parents seemed to think that everything I did was an extension of their hard work. They didn't just raise me, they built me, in their eyes. And I knew that's how they saw things. Every achievement, every little victory I had in life was somehow always attributed to their sacrifices. It was always, well, we did so much for you, and now look at what you've done. It wasn't that they were bad parents, they were loving, but they were also possessive in a way that sometimes felt a bit too much. I'd grown up in a small town, and like most small towns, everyone knew everything about everyone. My parents made sure to remind me of the sacrifices they'd made to give me a good life. The years they spent saving for my college tuition, the countless hours they worked to make sure I had a roof over my head and food in my stomach. It's true, they worked hard. They both held steady jobs. My mom worked as a secretary at a local office, and my dad was a mechanic. They weren't wealthy, but they always managed to make ends meet. But despite their hard work, they never seemed to understand that I wasn't obligated to follow the same path they'd taken. They didn't understand that just because they gave me the basics, they didn't own the fruits of my success. Still, I knew deep down that it wasn't easy for them to see me leave home, take a job in the city, and actually make something of myself. They were proud, yes, but in that quiet, possessive way that always made me feel like they were waiting for me to give something back. Even when I got my first real job out of college, they were happy for me, but there was always a catch. My mom, especially, loved to remind me of how they raised me right, so I could succeed. I remember when I landed my first promotion. I could see the pride in their eyes when I told them, but I also saw something else, an unspoken expectation. I didn't make a big deal of it, but every time I received a raise or a new bonus, the questions would follow. How much are you making now? Do you need any help with anything? We could really use a little extra, after everything we did for you. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to acknowledge their contribution. I had always shrugged it off. I'm doing fine, I'd tell them. Don't worry about me. But over time, their subtle hints grew louder. It became clear that no matter how successful I was, they still saw themselves as the ones who should benefit from my success. It's not that they ever came out and demanded anything outright, it was always more of a suggestion wrapped in guilt. My life now is far different from when I was growing up. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, far from the familiar streets of my hometown. I've made a life for myself here, with a career that I've worked tirelessly to build. I've learned how to take care of myself, how to manage money, how to set goals and actually achieve them. I've created a sense of independence that I'm proud of, independence that was hard-won. It's not just about money or career, it's about the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can stand on your own 2 feet without someone else constantly holding you up. But there's always been one thing lurking in the back of my mind. No matter how much I achieved, no matter how far I got, there was always a sense of obligation to my parents. They had been there, of course, through all the ups and downs of my life, but their help always felt like it came with strings attached. Whenever I mentioned my success, they always seemed to see it as something they had a right to claim. I'd see the way they looked at me when I talked about my accomplishments, a mixture of pride, yes, but also a look that said, "You owe us for this." It wasn't until recently, when I received a significant performance bonus at work, that everything came to a head. That was the moment I realized just how far my parents' expectations had stretched. They always thought they had a claim on my success, but when the bonus came in, they decided it was their turn to cash in. And that's when I knew something had to change. "Mom, I got my bonus today," I'd said over the phone, trying to sound casual, like I hadn't been dreading the conversation for weeks. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said, her voice bright, too bright. You must be really proud of yourself. I am, yeah. It's a big deal for me. I bet it is. You know, she continued, the casual tone shifting ever so slightly, we could really use some help around here. Your dad's been talking about how much we could do with a little extra money, especially now that things are tight. I paused, feeling a knot twist in my stomach. This wasn't the first time they'd made a comment like this, but it was the first time it had come up in the context of my bonus. They'd never been shy about asking for help, but this felt different. It felt like they thought they were entitled to it. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound calm even though my heart was racing. Well, we spent so many years feeding you, taking care of you, she said, as if this explained everything. It's just fair, right? You can spare a little, now that you're doing so well. I felt a rush of anger flood through me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't that I didn't care about them. It was that I'd never asked for this kind of debt. I wasn't the one who'd chosen to bring me into this world. They had done it because they wanted to, and I had worked for everything I had now. I was starting to see it all too clearly. I wasn't a daughter in their eyes. I was a financial resource. I don't think I can do that, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Oh, don't be silly, she said, dismissing my concern. We're your parents, after all. You owe it to us. I stayed silent, knowing what was coming next, but it didn't make it easier to hear. And that was the moment I realized that things were about to change. I had spent too many years being the dutiful daughter, trying to make them proud, trying to live up to their expectations, but no more. This time, I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. My bonus had been a nice surprise, just a little something extra to reward me for the work I'd put in all year. It was a gesture from the company, a recognition of my efforts. I hadn't even told my parents about it yet, but as soon as I did, everything changed. It was a Sunday afternoon when I called my mom, thinking it would be a casual check-in, just like every other week. I wasn't prepared for the conversation that followed. Hey, how's everything going? I asked, trying to sound lighthearted as usual. Oh, everything's good, honey, she said, her voice bright but with an underlying tone that I couldn't quite place. How about you? How's work going? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to share the news. Actually, I got my performance bonus last week. Oh, that's wonderful, she replied. You must be so proud of yourself. I could feel her smile through the phone. She was always happy when something good happened for me, but I also knew she was fishing for more. It wasn't the first time she'd shown interest in my paycheck. But today, there was something different in her voice, a tone that was almost too sweet, too eager. I'm glad you're doing well, she continued. You know, your father and I have been thinking, it's about time you helped us out a little more, don't you think? I felt my stomach tighten at the shift in her tone. I knew where this was going. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though I couldn't mask the wariness creeping into my words. Well, now that you've got this bonus, it would be nice if you could share some of it with us. We've been helping you your whole life, after all. It's only fair that you help us now, don't you think? She said, almost too calmly. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. Help you? With what? Well, she began, her voice taking on that familiar, almost expectant tone. Your father's been talking about how we could really use a little extra, especially with the repairs around the house and some of the bills we've got piling up. You know, it's not easy getting by on what your dad makes. And I've been doing what I can, but it would really help if you could chip in. I was silent for a moment, my mind racing. They were my parents, and yes, they had supported me growing up. But this felt different. It felt like an entitled demand. Like they thought my success was just another way for them to get a piece of what I'd worked for. I don't think I can do that, I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I mean, I've worked hard for that bonus, Mom. I don't think it's right to just give it away like that. Oh, come on, she replied quickly, the sweetness now gone from her voice. We're your parents, honey. We raised you. We spent years feeding you, supporting you. And now that you've got this money, you can't spare us a little bit? After everything we've done for you? My heart was pounding in my chest. I had heard this rhetoric before, but never like this. Never so blunt, so demanding. I felt a flicker of anger start to rise. I didn't ask for all that help, I said, my voice sharp now. You raised me because that's what parents do. And I've worked hard to get where I am, just like you did. Her tone shifted again, becoming more cutting. So now you're too good for us, huh? After everything we did for you, you can't even help us out when we're in need. No, that's not it, I said, trying to stay calm. It's just what? She snapped. Just that you don't owe us anything, right? Is that it? You've made it big, and now you think you don't have to give anything back? What happened to being grateful? I was stunned. The guilt hit me like a wave, but so did the realization that I had been doing this dance with them for years. They always had a way of making me feel like their sacrifices were a currency I owed back in full. No matter how much I achieved, no matter how much I worked for myself, they always seemed to feel entitled to a piece of it. I am grateful, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. But this is my money. I earned it. I didn't ask for you to give up your lives for me, and I'm not going to pay you back for something you chose to do. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my mom breathing, but she didn't speak. I waited, wondering if I had gone too far, wondering if I was about to lose them forever over a stupid argument. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. Well, I guess that's how it is now. You're just too busy for your old parents, too successful to care about where you came from. I didn't know what to say to that. I felt my anger and guilt battling each other, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this continue. I wasn't going to be made to feel responsible for their choices anymore. You raised me to be independent, I said quietly, and I am. I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving up my hard-earned money. I'm sorry, Mom, but this is my decision. She didn't respond right away. I waited, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. Finally, she muttered, "Fine. I guess we won't be needing anything from you then." And with that, she hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My chest was tight, my mind spinning. I had never done anything like this before. I had never stood up to them like that. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about breaking free from their expectations, from their sense of entitlement, and I had taken the first step. The days that followed the phone call were a blur of conflicting emotions. I hadn't expected the conversation with my mom to escalate so quickly, but there it was. I'd stood my ground, but the weight of what I'd said still hung heavy on me. The guilt crept in at odd moments, when I was making my morning coffee, sitting at my desk at work, or lying awake at night. Was I really being unfair? Was I too harsh? My parents had always been there for me, even if their love had often felt conditional. I had to remind myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. They had always expected me to be grateful, to acknowledge their sacrifices, and now they were pushing me further than I was willing to go. But still, a small voice in my head kept whispering that maybe I had crossed a line. Maybe I'd taken the wrong approach. I tried to distract myself with work, with the busyness of my daily routine, but no matter how hard I focused on my tasks, my thoughts kept drifting back to them. I could hear my mom's voice on the phone, the sharpness in her words when she told me I was ungrateful. I couldn't shake the feeling that things were different now. That line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The phone calls didn't stop. My parents started calling more frequently, often at times I couldn't pick up, leaving messages that carried the same message. You owe us. Sometimes my mom would leave a simple, "I don't understand why you're being like this." Other times the messages were laced with guilt. "We raised you, we gave you everything, and now this is how you repay us?" Each message felt like a weight pressing down on me, and every time I heard my phone buzz, I hesitated before picking it up. I'd become so used to being on the receiving end of their guilt trips, but this time I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. The moment I'd made that decision to hold on to my bonus, to refuse their demands, had been a turning point for me. I couldn't allow myself to be manipulated anymore, not by them, not by anyone. One evening, about a week after the phone call, I sat down at my desk after work, scrolling through emails, when my phone rang again. I knew it was my mom. A part of me thought about ignoring it, but I couldn't do it. Not now. Not after everything that had been said. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? Don't think this is over." My mom's voice came through the line, cold and controlled. "You've made your choice, and we've made ours. You're not the person I thought you were." I swallowed hard, feeling that familiar pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. "Mom, I don't owe you my money. I didn't ask you to make sacrifices for me. You did it because you wanted to, and I'm grateful. I really am. But this is my money. I earned it, and I can't just give it away because you think I should." She let out a sharp breath, the silence stretching between us. "You think this is just about money? It's not, you know. It's about respect. You don't respect us anymore. You don't understand what it means to be a family. You're turning your back on us." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm not turning my back on you. I'm just setting a boundary. I'm an adult now, Mom. I have to make my own decisions, and I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving up something I worked for." The line went silent again, and I could feel the weight of her disappointment through the phone. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice quieter now, but still heavy with accusation. "I hope you don't regret this, honey. I really do. One day, you'll understand what we did for you, and when you do, maybe you'll wish you had been there for us." The words stung, but I knew they were just another attempt to manipulate me, another way to make me feel like I was wrong for standing my ground. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, my voice calm despite the anger bubbling inside. "But this is the choice I'm making. I have to live my life, Mom." There was another pause, and I knew the conversation was over. I didn't wait for her to hang up. I did it myself. The moment I pressed the end call button, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I wasn't sure where things would go from here. I wasn't sure if my relationship with my parents would ever be the same again. But I knew one thing. I had done the right thing for me. The next few days were filled with more messages, more calls. My dad, who had mostly stayed quiet through all of this, called me one evening. I hesitated before answering, expecting the same guilt-laden tone from him. But what he said took me by surprise. "You don't understand, do you?" he asked, his voice lower, more resigned than angry. "We've always supported you, and now that you're in a position to help, you're refusing. You think this is just about money, but it's not. It's about family. It's about what we did for you all these years. You owe us, and we're not asking for much." I felt my stomach churn, the same resentment I'd felt when my mom made her demands creeping up. "Dad, I didn't ask for you to do everything for me. I didn't ask for you to give up your life for me. You chose that. You were my parents, and I appreciate everything you did, but that doesn't mean I owe you forever." "You're wrong," he said, his voice hardening. "You'll regret this. You'll see. One day, when you're older, you'll understand." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady. "But not today. Not now." There was a long pause, and then he hung up without another word. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone in disbelief. I knew they were hurt, but I also knew this was something I had to do. I had to stop living in their shadow, stop letting them control me with guilt. But it wasn't easy. The emotional toll it was taking on me started to feel like a weight around my neck. I felt like I was constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I had done the right thing. They were my parents, after all. They had given me everything, or so they said. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep living my life based on their expectations. The more they pushed, the stronger my resolve became. But it was hard, and it didn't help that every time I spoke to them, I felt the same pressure building. They were losing patience with me, and part of me feared that they might just cut me out of their lives altogether. But I couldn't back down. I had to protect myself, my future, and my independence. As the days passed, I knew I couldn't keep going on like this. Something had to change. The tension between us was suffocating, and I couldn't let it go on forever. It was time to make my next move. It was time to take back control. It was a Saturday morning when I decided I had had enough. The endless calls, the guilt trips, the manipulation, they had worn me down to the point where I could feel it in my bones that something needed to change. I wasn't going to let my parents control me anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my choices, my future, and certainly not my money. I had been planning this for days, quietly, without telling anyone, not even my closest friends. But as I sat there at my kitchen table, the weight of it all pressing down on me, I knew it was time to take action. The first step was simple. I had to protect what was mine. I pulled up my bank account on my phone, scrolling through the transactions until I found the deposit of my bonus. It wasn't huge, but it was more than enough to make a difference in my life. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that if I didn't act now, my parents would find some way to get their hands on it. They had already made it clear they felt entitled to a portion of it, and I had been weak for too long. I didn't hesitate. I opened a new account, one that I knew they wouldn't be able to access. I transferred the entire bonus into it, feeling a strange sense of relief as I did. My stomach, which had been tight with anxiety for weeks, finally started to unclench. I didn't owe them this money. I didn't owe them anything. As soon as the transfer was complete, I knew I had to confront them. I couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep avoiding their calls. I needed to tell them, to make it clear once and for all that I was in control of my own life. So I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom's number. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was tentative, as if she was unsure of what I was about to say. Mom, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. There was a slight pause, and I could almost hear her breath catch. About what? She asked, her tone suddenly guarded. About the bonus. I transferred it into a separate account, I said, not wasting any time. You're not getting any of it. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. What do you mean? You can't just keep it all to yourself, honey. We're your parents. We raised you. You owe us. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice firm now. I've worked hard for this. It's mine, and I'm not giving it to you. You're being unreasonable, she said, her voice rising, the disappointment clear in her words. You're being selfish. You think you can just cut us off like this? After everything we've done for you? No, Mom, I said, feeling the anger bubble up inside of me. You raised me because that's what parents do. You don't get to hold it over my head every time I succeed. I don't owe you for what you chose to do. I didn't ask you to sacrifice everything for me, and I didn't ask for your help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing heavily, like she was trying to process what I had just said. It was the silence before the storm. How could you say that? She finally asked, her voice trembling. You think we didn't do everything for you? You think we didn't give up our lives to make sure you had everything you needed? I'm grateful, Mom. I am, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. But I'm not going to keep paying for it with my success. I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving up everything I've worked for. Fine, she snapped. If that's how you feel, then we're done. Don't bother calling us again. Don't come back here. The words hit me like a slap in the face. It stung, but it also felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had expected it, had known, deep down, that this would happen. They were never going to be happy with me taking control of my own life. They were never going to accept that I didn't owe them everything. I could feel the tears starting to well up, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. I had made my choice, and it was the right one. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. Goodbye. I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, but my heart was pounding with a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had made a decision that was all my own, and I knew, deep down, it was the right one. The call ended, but I still sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, the silence overwhelming. I didn't know if I would ever speak to my parents again. I didn't know if they would ever forgive me, but what I did know was that I couldn't keep living in their shadow, afraid of disappointing them. I had to live my own life, on my own terms. As the hours passed, I started to feel a sense of peace. The guilt that had haunted me for so long began to fade away, replaced by something new, something I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of freedom. That evening, I didn't pick up my phone when it rang. It wasn't a call I was ready to answer. I needed time to figure out what came next. But I knew this. I had taken control of my life, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after I hung up on my mom were strange, to say the least. There was a part of me that expected the guilt to come crashing back in, that voice in my head telling me I had done something wrong. But it didn't happen. The more time passed, the clearer it became that I had made the right decision. It wasn't about the money, it was about my own independence, my own right to choose how to live my life without being constantly tethered to their expectations. I gave myself some space, not answering any of their calls. I knew they were angry, probably hurt, but I also knew that this was the only way I could move forward. I couldn't keep giving them pieces of my life, my success, just because they expected it. They had their own lives to live, and so did I. The next week was quiet. The calls stopped coming, and I began to wonder if I had really lost them forever. I thought about the times I had tried to please them, tried to meet their expectations, but it always felt like I was playing a game where the rules kept changing. I had spent so many years trying to make them proud, to earn their approval, but at some point I realized that I was just losing myself in the process. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon when I saw a new message pop up on my phone. It was from my dad. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. "Can we talk?" his message read. "I think we need to clear the air." I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance, but another part of me knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I had to face them, when I had to make sure they understood that I wasn't rejecting them, I was just rejecting the way they had been treating me. I took a deep breath and replied, "Sure. When?" It didn't take long for him to respond. "How about tonight? We can meet at that cafe down the street." I agreed, not sure what to expect but willing to listen. I'd done my part. I had set my boundaries. Now, it was time to see what they would do with them. That evening, I sat at the cafe, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee as I waited. I wasn't nervous exactly, but I did feel a sense of anticipation. Would they be angry? Would they try to guilt me again? Or would this be the beginning of something new, something better? When my parents walked in, my mom's eyes were red, as if she had been crying. My dad, on the other hand, seemed calm, but there was a heaviness in his demeanor that made me uneasy. They sat down across from me, and for a moment, none of us spoke. Finally, my dad broke the silence. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice low. "We were wrong to pressure you like that. I don't know what came over us. I guess we were scared. We've always had this idea of what your life should look like, and we didn't know how to let go of it." I looked at him, surprised by the admission. "It's not about your idea of my life, Dad. It's about me living my own life. I've worked hard for what I have, and I want to make my own choices, without feeling like I owe anyone anything." He nodded slowly, looking down at the table. "I know, and I'm sorry we didn't see that sooner. We just wanted to be a part of your success. But we forgot that your success is yours alone. You don't owe us for everything we did. We did it because we loved you, but we need to accept that you're not the little girl we raised anymore." My mom, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I was angry, I think, because I felt like you were turning your back on us. I thought you didn't care anymore, but I see now that I was wrong. You were right to stand up for yourself. You're your own person, and you don't owe us anything." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had never heard them admit that before, that they understood I wasn't rejecting them, just asserting my independence. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt like they were seeing me, not as their child who owed them for their sacrifices, but as an adult who deserved to make her own choices. "I don't want to lose you," my dad said, looking at me earnestly. "I just want to be a part of your life without making you feel like we're asking for something in return." I smiled softly, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. I don't want to lose you either, Dad, but I need you to understand that I have to live my own life now. I can't keep carrying the weight of everything you've done for me. I need to be able to stand on my own. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. We understand, she said, her voice breaking. We're sorry. We just want you to be happy, no matter what that looks like. The moment hung there between us, a long, emotional silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It felt like we were finally seeing each other for who we were, not as roles in a family dynamic that had been forced upon us. We had all made mistakes, but we were here, trying to make things right. I'm sorry too, I said quietly, for shutting you out. But I had to do it. I had to set that boundary. I couldn't keep being the daughter who owed you everything. My dad nodded again, a small smile tugging at his lips. I get it. I really do. And we'll do better. We'll try to give you the space you need. The conversation drifted into lighter topics after that, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. There was no more tension, no more guilt, just understanding. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that this was a step in the right direction. I had set my boundaries, and for the first time, my parents had respected them. It wasn't easy, and there was still a lot of healing to be done, but I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. As I walked away from that cafe later that evening, I felt a quiet confidence settle in. My parents and I weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough for now.